Welcome to the deep dive, where well, as you know, we take one big idea and we really try to get under its skin. And today, that idea is happiness.
Happiness.
Happiness. It's
Ah,
something we all experience, right, in all these different ways, from that sort of quiet sense that things are all right to those super intense moments of just pure elation. It can be like a surprise, just come out of nowhere, or it can be tied to a big achievement.
yeah. And it's more than just like a nice feeling. What's become super clear from the research is that happiness, like however we end up like defining it or understanding it, is deeply connected to our overall well-being. We're
Yeah.
talking about physical health, mental health, the quality of our relationships, even, and even like how we deal with stress and those curveballs that life throws at us. Like how resilient are we? It seems tied to happiness in some way.
Exactly. So our deep dive today has one core mission really, and that is to unpack this fascinating thing we call happiness. We're going to be looking at how it's defined. How do we even measure something so personal? What might be the causes behind it? How it affects us, and how different cultures and philosophies have approached this whole idea of happiness. And our sources for this journey include a really comprehensive look at happiness from Wikipedia, which gives us a really great sort of overview to start with. Okay, so to start, what is happiness really? I mean, it seems like such a basic word, but when you really try to pin it down, it gets kind of slippery.
You've hit on like a very fundamental point here. The definition of happiness has been a topic of discussion for centuries,
Yeah.
literally. And I think generally you'll see it being used in sort of two main senses. One refers to our sort of immediate emotional state,
Hmm.
right? So those feelings we have in the here and now, like
Mhm.
joy or contentment,
Yeah.
right? So think of Daniel Kahneman's take. He said, happiness is what I experience here and now. So that's one key aspect.
Right. So that moment to moment feeling. But then there's also a broader perspective, right? It's like how we feel about our lives as a whole, like our general sort of life satisfaction.
True.
And Vunehoven, he defines it as the overall appreciation of one's life as a whole. And it's interesting because even Kahneman, who was focused on that more immediate experience, he later came to believe that this overall life satisfaction, how we feel about our life as a whole, is actually more important to people. Like in the long run, it's that sense that things are generally going well for them.
Precisely. And those two sort of sides of it, they often come together in the idea of subjective well-being,
Okay.
or SWB, right? And this basically encompasses both our current emotions,
Hmm.
so our moods, and that deeper sense of satisfaction with life as a whole. And Sanja Lubirsky, she gives us a really good working definition of this. She says happiness is the experience of joy, contentment, or positive well-being combined with the sense that one's life is good, meaningful, and worthwhile.
Right. Right.
So it's not just about feeling good in this moment, but it's also about having that sense of purpose, that sense of value in your life.
Right. It's almost like this two-pronged thing, right? Like feeling good on a day-to-day basis, but also feeling good about the bigger picture, about the trajectory of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And we also came across this Greek idea of eudaimonia,
Yes.
which gets translated as happiness sometimes, but it
Yeah.
feels like it means something a little bit more,
Yeah.
like flourishing or living a life well lived.
Yeah, yeah. And Xavier Landert, he actually suggests that we should be thinking about happiness as this combination of subjective well-being. So that SWB we talked about, our general sort of mood and eudaimonia,
Right.
and it really just goes to show like how layered this concept is.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And these different ways of understanding happiness can actually lead to quite different findings when we try to actually measure it. So for instance, you might see Nordic countries consistently ranking very high on surveys that are focusing on that overall life satisfaction, so that is SWB. But then South American countries tend to score higher on surveys that are kind of tapping into those more current positive emotions.
Yeah.
So that more moment to moment, that's referred to as affect.
Yeah.
So the picture you get really depends on the questions that you're asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting, and I think it highlights that happiness is kind of a bit of a catch-all term, right?
Right.
It's what the source material refers to as a polyseme,
Okay.
which is a fuzzy concept,
Yeah.
where the meaning actually shifts with the context.
Right.
And it's not just about the definition that we use either. I mean, even when we look back at our own experiences, like how happy we remember being might not actually be the same as how happy we actually felt in the moment,
Oh, wow.
you know?
That's really interesting.
Yeah, our memory of events
Mm-hmm.
can be colored by things like the what's called the peak end rule,
Yeah.
you know?
Okay.
So we tend to remember the the most intense part of an experience
Right.
and how it ended more clearly.
Right.
And that can really skew our overall recollection of how happy we were.
Yeah.
Kind of like
Yeah.
we kind of overemphasize the peaks and the endings.
Interesting.
And Michaela Suma, she makes this really, really helpful distinction, I think, between joy and happiness. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
she suggests that joy is more about the feeling that goes along with an activity, so like the enjoyment of the process,
I see.
whereas happiness is more tied to a specific achievement or like a broader judgment of your life.
So joy is more in the doing, and happiness is more in the having done, or in the reflecting on having done.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So, you might experience joy while you're working on a project, right? But the happiness might actually come when you finally complete it and you reflect on that accomplishment.
Okay, so we're starting to see how complex this is. But how do we move from these abstract ideas to actually like getting a handle on how happy people are? I mean, it feels like trying to measure the wind, you know?
Yeah, it is a real challenge,
Yeah.
but it's one that people have been grappling with for a long time.
Right.
And believe it or not, back in 1780, Jeremy Bentham actually thought that because happiness was like this ultimate aim, the governments should try to actually measure it
Wow.
to
Right.
to see how well they were doing in promoting it.
So that's surprisingly modern thinking, you know. So fast forward to today, do we have like a universal happiness index that governments are now tracking?
We don't have a single universally agreed upon index,
Right.
but we do have a lot of effort going into measuring it.
Right.
And the most common approach is through these self-report surveys,
Okay.
where people are basically asked to rate their own levels of happiness or life satisfaction.
Mhm.
But as you can imagine, there are definitely limitations
Right.
to these surveys. Our answers can be influenced by all sorts of things, right?
Hmm.
Our current mood, how we interpret the questions, even just like our tendency to kind of look on the bright side or not, right? We're also not always great at remembering our past emotions accurately
Yeah.
or predicting how future events will make us feel.
Right.
What's called effective forecasting, right? So we might think that, winning the lottery is going to bring us unending bliss, but reality often shows a more nuanced picture.
Yeah. So these surveys give us a snapshot, but they're not perfect. And yet researchers still use them?
They do, particularly happiness economists and
Yeah.
psychologists who are looking at trends across populations.
Right.
And there's several well-established scales, that are designed for this purpose.
Hmm.
One of the quicker ones is the what's called the subjective happiness scale, or SHS.
Oh, okay.
And it's just 4 questions,
Yeah.
basically asking people to rate how happy they are generally,
Yeah.
and how well they kind of fit descriptions of happy or unhappy people.
Got it.
Then there's what's called the positive and negative affect schedule,
Wow.
or PANAS,
Penis.
which is a bit more detailed.
Yeah.
It's asking about 20 different emotions,
Wow.
both positive and negative,
Right.
and how strongly people have felt them over different time periods.
So PANAS gives you more of a look at the balance of good and bad feelings.
Exactly, yeah.
What other tools are out there?
Well, there's what's called the satisfaction with life scale, or SWLS,
Oh.
and that takes a slightly different approach. It presents 5 statements about someone's life,
Okay.
and then people rate how much they agree or disagree
Right.
on a 7-point scale.
Right.
So it's more of a cognitive assessment
Right.
of how satisfied people are with their overall life.
Right.
Then the widely cited World Happiness Report
Right.
uses what's called the Cantrell ladder,
Okay.
right? So imagine a ladder with the best possible life for you at the top. So that'd be at the 10,
Right.
and the worst possible life at the bottom,
0.
0, right? And people indicate where on that ladder they feel they currently stand.
I see.
So it's a very direct way to gauge overall life satisfaction.
Right. So that one's is pretty straightforward. Anything else in the toolkit?
Well, Gallup runs this positive experience survey that asks people about specific experiences they had the previous day. So things like whether they felt enjoyment or laughed or felt rested or were treated with respect or learned something interesting. And interestingly, in 2018, a lot of South American countries scored very highly on this particular measure
Right.
of daily positive experiences.
Right.
And then for a more comprehensive assessment, there's the Oxford Happiness Inventory, which is it's a longer questionnaire. It's 29 items
Wow.
where people basically choose the statement that best describes how they've been feeling recently,
Right.
and that aims for a more detailed profile of someone's well-being.
So it's quite a variety of ways to try to capture this. And as you mentioned, the World Happiness Report has been doing this on a global scale since 2012.
Exactly, yeah. Looking at
Mhm.
both those life satisfaction scores and those reports of daily emotions
Right.
to kind of rank countries.
Hmm.
And it's always interesting to see the patterns that emerge. And it's not just about international comparisons either. Some countries are taking this very seriously at a national level.
Right.
So the UK started measuring national well-being back in 2012.
Right.
And Bhutan famously uses gross national happiness as a key indicator,
I remember that.
you know.
Yeah.
And it includes things like cultural preservation and environmental sustainability
Right.
alongside economic
There's
factors.
absolutely.
And there's a growing push to develop what are called multidimensional dashboards
Right.
that combine these subjective measures with objective data, right? So
Yep.
so things like levels of social fairness or individual autonomy or community engagement to get a more complete picture of societal well-being, because ultimately happiness isn't just about a feeling, right?
Right.
It's about the conditions that allow people to thrive. And one consistent finding across all of this measurement is that individual levels of happiness tend to be relatively stable over
Yeah.
over time, right? So while our moods might go up and down, our general set point for happiness seems to be pretty consistent.
That's interesting. It suggests there might be, something pretty fundamental that influences that baseline happiness.
Hmm.
So we're trying to define it, we're trying to measure it. What about what actually makes us happy?
Yeah.
What are the key drivers of happiness?
Well, there are a number of theories out there.
Right.
Some focus on external factors,
Yeah.
those unexpected good things that happen to us, the positive interactions with people we care about, feeling accepted and valued by our
Yeah.
by our social groups.
Right.
But there's also a strong view that happiness isn't just about these fleeting external pleasures.
Right. Right. It feels like it has to come from something a little bit deeper than just a series of good events.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
And the field of positive psychology has really explored this.
Yeah.
Along with broader research into well-being and that idea of eudaimonia we talked about,
Right. Yeah.
or flourishing.
Right.
It's a huge area,
Yeah.
looking at everything from our biology to our social connections
Uh-huh.
to our sense of purpose.
Right.
And one of the most consistent findings, and this is highlighted by the decades-long Harvard study of adult development,
Right.
is the critical importance of strong interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
So the happiest and healthiest people in that study were the ones who had close supportive connections with others.
Yeah. That resonates deeply. I mean, it's often our relationships that get us through the tough times and amplify, the good ones.
It's true.
Right.
And things like getting sufficient sleep and maintaining good mental health are also really significant contributors to our overall well-being.
Right.
Often, even more so than our income level. You might have heard of Laurie Santos's incredibly popular Psychology and the Good Life course at Yale,
Oh yeah.
which delves into a lot of these evidence-based factors.
Yeah. I have. It seems like people are really seeking out out this kind of practical knowledge.
Mm,
And the source material mentioned these two sort of broad approaches to happiness, the hedonistic and the eudaimonic.
right.
Can you kind of unpack the difference there for us?
Certainly, certainly. So the hedonistic approach is essentially about maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain.
Right.
Right. So it's focused on those positive experiences and those immediate gratifications.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Okay.
the eudaimonic approach, on the other hand, is about living a life of meaning and purpose,
Right.
a life that's deeply, deeply fulfilling.
Right.
And it's interesting because even Daniel Kahneman, who initially focused on the experience of happiness,
Mm-hmm. Right.
later suggested that when people really think about what they want from life,
Mm.
they're often more driven by this sense of satisfaction and meaning
Yeah.
than just by moment to moment happiness.
So it's the difference between feeling good and feeling like your life has value and direction.
Yeah.
And that actually makes me think of Viktor Frankl's experiences in the Nazi concentration camps, you know?
Yeah.
He observed that those who could find meaning in their suffering were more likely to survive.
It's a very powerful illustration, right?
Yeah.
And frankly, he identified three main sources of meaning.
Right.
One was creating something or like accomplishing a task.
Right.
Another was experiencing love and connection.
Right.
And then even finding meaning in unavoidable suffering
Right.
by choosing your attitude towards it.
Right.
And psychologist Robert Emmons, he's also done extensive work on the importance of goals and purpose, and has found that happiness often emerges as kind of a side effect of pursuing meaningful projects and activities,
Right.
even if happiness isn't the direct aim.
I see.
He talks about four key areas of meaning. So there's work. There's intimacy, there's spirituality, and something he calls transcendence. So that feeling of connection to something larger than oneself.
It seems like having a sense of purpose, having something to strive for beyond just personal pleasure is really important.
Hmm.
Like it's a really important piece of the puzzle. And the source material also touched on how our perspective on what brings happiness might evolve, might shift throughout our lives.
Yeah, yeah,
Right, like what we value in early adulthood might be different than what we value in later adulthood.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In early adulthood, there's often a stronger focus on external things. So
Mhm.
friendships, material possessions, financial success.
Right.
As we move into middle age, the emphasis tends to shift more towards relationships and financial security.
Okay.
And then in later life, things like inner peace, maintaining strong connections with family become more central. And the philosopher Antti Kauppinen, he has this theory that this might be linked to our perception of time.
Okay.
So, younger people with more future ahead of them,
Right.
focusing on different things than older people who are more aware of time passing.
That's a really insightful connection. How our sense of time, like how much time we feel like we have left, might actually shape our values and what we believe will make us happy at different stages of life.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So beyond these sort of broad theories, what about more specific frameworks for understanding happiness, like these self-fulfillment theories?
Yeah, so these theories often center on this idea that we have these fundamental human needs, and fulfilling these needs is really key to our well-being.
Okay.
And Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a very well-known example.
Right.
And that suggests that we need to satisfy our basic physiological and safety needs before we can move towards higher level needs. So things like belonging, esteem, and ultimately self-actualization,
Right.
realizing our full potential.
Right.
And Maslow also talked about these peak experiences. So those moments of intense joy and profound connection.
Right.
That can occur when we're deeply engaged in something meaningful.
Yeah.
And Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow is related to this.
Flow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that state of complete immersion in an activity where where you lose track of time and you experience this deep satisfaction.
Oh, I know that feeling. It's really quite wonderful when you're just so absorbed in a task that everything else just kind of melts away. It's incredibly rewarding.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And Eric Schrum, he viewed happiness as a sign that we're successfully navigating the challenges of human existence, right?
Yeah.
By developing our potential and connecting meaningfully with the world.
Okay.
And self-determination theory also emphasizes the importance of intrinsic motivation
Right.
and meeting three basic psychological needs. So feeling competent in what we do,
Right.
having a sense of autonomy and choice in our lives,
Right.
and experiencing relatedness and connection with others.
So it boils down to feeling capable, feeling in control, and feeling connected.
Exactly, yeah.
That seems like a pretty solid foundation for well-being.
And Ronald Englehart's research, looking at happiness across different countries,
Mm.
found that the degree of free choice available in a society has a significant impact on happiness levels,
Okay.
particularly once basic needs are met.
Right.
So where people have more control over their lives,
Mm.
they tend to report greater happiness. And religion can also play a role in societies where individual freedoms are more restricted.
Right.
You know, on a slightly different note, Sigmund Freud had a bit more of a pessimistic view.
Yeah.
He suggested that while we all seek happiness, our very nature to enjoy contrasts,
Okay.
more than stable states, means that lasting happiness is inherently difficult to achieve. And then there's this theory of motivational hedonism, which basically states that the pursuit of pleasure is the fundamental driving force in human life.
So a real mix of perspectives from fulfilling these deep-seated needs to a more basic sort of pursuit of pleasure. Now the source material also highlighted the growth of positive psychology.
Mm.
What's their unique contribution to understanding
So
happiness?
positive psychology, which really took off around the turn of the millennium,
Okay.
really shifted the focus of psychology away from just treating mental illness and towards understanding and promoting human flourishing and well-being.
Great.
And they've identified six core virtues
Okay.
that seem to be valued across different cultures.
Got it.
So wisdom and knowledge, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence.
Right.
And each of these broad virtues encompasses a range of more specific character strengths.
Right. So, for example, under wisdom and knowledge, you would have things like creativity and curiosity,
Exactly.
and under humanity, you'd have things like love and kindness.
Precisely, yeah.
Right.
And for a trait to be considered a key character strength within positive psychology, it has to meet a pretty strict set of criteria.
Right.
So it has to be consistently valued across cultures. It should be something that contributes to fulfillment. It shouldn't diminish others,
Right.
among other things.
Right.
And positive psychology has also been instrumental in developing and testing various short-term interventions aimed at increasing happiness and well-being, many of which have shown promising results.
Right.
And Emma Sepali's work emphasizes the crucial role of compassion, both towards others and towards ourselves, as a vital component of happiness.
So it seems like kindness both given and received is another key ingredient in this happiness recipe. Now we've talked a lot about individual factors. Can happiness spread between people? The outline mentioned this idea of a spillover effect.
Yeah. It's a really interesting finding, actually, from the Framingham Heart Study,
Yeah.
which is this long-term study looking at cardiovascular health.
Right.
And they discovered that happiness can actually spread through social networks,
Okay.
even extending to 3 degrees of separation. So that's your friends, your friends' friends, and even your friends' friends' friends.
Wow.
Right.
That's wild. So it's like happiness is contagious.
Yeah.
So surrounding yourself with positive people might actually have like a measurable impact on your own happiness levels.
It seems so.
Yeah.
But then there's this intriguing counter argument,
Okay.
particularly from writers like Albert Camus and Eckhart Tolle,
Hmm.
that directly pursuing happiness might actually make it harder to attain.
That sounds a bit paradoxical. How could that be?
Well, the idea is that if you're constantly focused on trying to be happy,
Right.
you might miss the joy and contentment that can be found in just the present moment,
I see.
you know.
Right.
And John Stuart Mill also believed that happiness is best achieved indirectly, as a kind of a byproduct of focusing on other meaningful goals and activities
Right.
rather than consciously trying to make yourself happy.
Right.
And he suggested that if you're fortunate in other ways, you'll almost inhale happiness with the air you breathe without even thinking about it.
Right.
And William Inge famously said that the happiest people often don't have a specific reason for their happiness. They just are,
Right.
you know. And Orson Swett Martin even proposed that some people are just born with a naturally happy disposition.
So maybe sometimes the best approach is to focus on living a meaningful life, and happiness will follow as a result,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to chasing it head on.
Right.
Now the outline also mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy
Yes.
and this idea of synthetic happiness.
Yeah.
Can you kind of unpack those a little bit for us?
Certainly, certainly. So cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT as it's known,
Yeah.
is a very widely used therapeutic technique
Right.
that helps people identify and change negative patterns of thinking and behavior.
Right.
And it often incorporates principles of positive psychology,
Right.
and it aims to improve emotional regulation and overall well-being, which can certainly contribute to greater happiness.
Hmm.
Common CBT techniques include learning to reframe negative thoughts in a more positive light, practicing coping skills for managing difficult emotions, and consciously choosing to engage in activities that support positive well-being.
So it's about actively working on your mental and behavioral habits to